The old woman had millions of dollars in her name, a mansion large enough to get lost in, and a dining room that could seat 20 people. Yet for months, she had been eating almost nothing. Every evening, a tray of untouched food was carried back to the kitchen, exactly as it had arrived. Her family believed she had lost her appetite because of old age. Her doctors blamed depression. The servants had stopped asking questions. But on the night a new cook placed a simple plate of homemade chicken and potatoes in front of her, something happened that nobody in that mansion had seen in months. The old woman picked up her fork, and the millionaire standing in the doorway realized that his mother wasn't refusing food because she couldn't eat. She was refusing because nobody had made her feel loved enough to eat. If you believe that kindness can give someone a second chance, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes, one small act of kindness can change an entire life. In the quiet hills outside Asheville, North Carolina, stood a magnificent stone mansion surrounded by towering oak trees, perfectly trimmed gardens, and a long driveway that curved toward enormous iron gates. It belonged to Gregory Whitmore, a successful American businessman whose companies had made him a millionaire before he turned 40. From the outside, Gregory seemed to have everything a man could want. He had money, influence, a beautiful home, and a successful career that kept him traveling across the country. But inside that mansion lived the one person he could never replace, his 78-year-old mother, Margaret Whitmore. Margaret had once been the heart of the house. She had raised Gregory alone after his father died when Gregory was only 12. She worked 2 jobs, packed his lunches, waited outside his school in the rain, and somehow found enough money to pay for his college education. When Gregory eventually built his business empire, Margaret never asked for expensive gifts. She only wanted him to come home for dinner once in a while. But success changed Gregory's life faster than he realized. His business demanded meetings in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and Dallas. His phone never stopped ringing. His calendar was always full. Whenever he called his mother, he promised that he would visit soon. Soon became next week. Next week became next month. And eventually, Gregory stopped noticing how much time had passed. Margaret's health slowly declined. She became quieter. She stopped going into the garden. She stopped attending church on Sundays. Most painfully, she stopped eating. At first, everyone thought it was temporary. The doctors prescribed medication and encouraged her to eat small meals. The household staff prepared soups, roasted vegetables, fresh bread, pasta, and expensive dishes ordered from the finest restaurants in Asheville. Margaret barely touched any of them. Her longtime housekeeper, Ruth, tried everything she could think of. She made Margaret's favorite apple pie. She prepared warm oatmeal in the mornings. She even called Gregory repeatedly, begging him to come home. But Gregory always had an excuse. Then one cold Monday morning, Ruth finally resigned. She left a note explaining that she could no longer watch Margaret disappear while everyone pretended everything was normal. Gregory returned home that evening, furious that his staff had abandoned him at such an inconvenient time. He walked into the mansion expecting to find everything under control. Instead, he found his mother sitting alone beside a window. She looked smaller than he remembered. Her white hair was neatly combed, but her face had become painfully thin. A blanket covered her legs. Beside her sat a tray containing breakfast that had never been touched. Gregory's anger disappeared. For the first time, he realized that his mother wasn't simply getting older. She was fading. He sat beside her and held her hand, but Margaret only looked outside. Gregory promised to hire someone immediately. The next morning, a woman named Clara Bennett arrived at the mansion. Clara was 39 years old, a widow, and the mother of an 11-year-old son named Samuel. She had worked as a cook in restaurants and private homes for years, but after her husband died unexpectedly, she had struggled to keep her small family afloat. She didn't have impressive references from wealthy families. She didn't drive an expensive car. She arrived at the mansion wearing a modest gray coat, carrying a worn handbag and a small notebook filled with recipes. Gregory interviewed her briefly. He explained that his mother had not eaten properly for months and that doctors had failed to solve the problem. He told Clara that she would have complete freedom in the kitchen but warned her that Margaret was difficult. Clara listened quietly. Then she asked one question. She wanted to know what Margaret had been eating before she stopped eating. Gregory hesitated. He didn't know. That answer broke something inside Clara. How could a son know his mother's medical records, medication schedule, and doctor's appointments, but not know her favorite meal? Instead of judging him, Clara simply nodded. Her first day began differently from what everyone expected. She didn't prepare expensive food. She didn't call a restaurant. She didn't follow the mansion's elaborate menu. Instead, Clara spent several hours searching through old cookbooks, speaking with the gardeners, and asking the house staff questions about Margaret's younger years. Eventually, an elderly gardener named Thomas remembered something. Years ago, Margaret had often cooked a simple Sunday dinner for Gregory when he was a boy. Roasted chicken, creamy mashed potatoes, green beans with garlic, warm homemade bread, and a small apple cobbler for dessert. Clara smiled. That afternoon, she went to work. The kitchen filled with the smell of butter, rosemary, roasted chicken, fresh bread, and cinnamon. But there was something else Clara did. She set the dining table herself. She placed a simple blue napkin beside Margaret's plate because Thomas remembered that blue had always been her favorite color. Then Clara walked into Margaret's room. She didn't tell the old woman that dinner was ready. She simply sat beside her. For nearly 20 minutes, Clara talked about ordinary things. She told Margaret about her son Samuel, who loved baseball. She told her about the tiny apartment they shared and how Samuel once tried to bake a cake and nearly destroyed the kitchen. Margaret listened silently, but for the first time in months, she smiled. It was only a tiny smile. Clara noticed. She didn't push. Later that evening, Clara placed the dinner on the table. Margaret stared at the plate. Her hands trembled. She slowly picked up the fork. From the hallway, Gregory watched in disbelief. His mother took one bite, then another. She stopped. Her eyes filled with tears. Gregory stepped forward, but Clara gently raised her hand, telling him without words not to interrupt. Margaret took another bite, then another. She wasn't eating quickly. She was eating carefully, as though each bite carried a memory. After several minutes, she whispered something so quietly that Gregory almost didn't hear. She said the food tasted like home. Gregory looked down. He suddenly remembered being 8 years old, sitting at a tiny kitchen table while his mother placed mashed potatoes on his plate. He remembered her standing beside the stove. He remembered her singing softly. He remembered promising her that one day he would buy her a beautiful house where she would never have to worry about money again. He had kept that promise. But somewhere along the way, he had forgotten the more important one. He had promised never to leave her alone. That night, Gregory didn't return to his office. He sat across from his mother for hours. They talked until midnight. Margaret told him that she hadn't stopped eating because she hated food. She had stopped eating because every meal reminded her that the person she had spent her entire life caring for was always somewhere else. She had felt like a guest in her own home. Gregory cried, not the quiet tears of a man trying to hide his emotions. He cried openly. He apologized for every missed dinner, every unanswered call, every birthday he had attended through a video screen, every time his mother had said she was fine when she wasn't. Margaret didn't blame him. She simply reached across the table and held his hand. The following weeks changed the entire household. Gregory reorganized his business schedule. He hired competent executives and stopped believing that every problem required his personal attention. He began eating breakfast with his mother every morning. Clara continued cooking, but her role slowly became much more than that of a cook. She became part of the family. Samuel began visiting the mansion after school. Margaret loved watching him play in the garden. She taught him how to plant tomatoes and how to make apple cobbler. The mansion that had once felt cold became noisy again. There were footsteps in the hallway. There was laughter in the kitchen. There were conversations around the dinner table. And Margaret began eating regularly. Her doctors were amazed by her recovery. But one evening, something happened that nobody expected. Margaret asked Clara to sit beside her. She reached into a small wooden box and removed an old photograph. It showed Gregory as a little boy standing beside his mother. Margaret handed it to Clara. She told her that Clara had saved more than her appetite. She had reminded Margaret that she still mattered. Clara cried. She explained that she hadn't done anything extraordinary. She had simply listened. Margaret smiled and told her that sometimes listening was the greatest kindness a person could offer. Months passed. Margaret regained strength. She returned to church. She walked through her garden again. She even began preparing meals with Clara. Gregory's business continued to succeed, but money no longer occupied every corner of his life. One Sunday afternoon, he found his mother sitting at the kitchen table with Clara and Samuel. There was flour on the table. Apple slices were scattered everywhere. Samuel was laughing. Clara was pretending to be angry because he had eaten half the apples meant for the pie. Margaret was laughing so hard she had tears in her eyes. Gregory stood in the doorway and smiled. He finally understood something that wealth had never taught him. A mansion could provide shelter. Money could provide medicine. Luxury could provide comfort. But none of those things could replace love. Sometimes people don't need another expensive gift. They need someone to sit beside them, someone to listen, someone to remember their favorite meal, someone to make them feel that their life still matters. And that simple dinner had given Margaret something no doctor, millionaire, or mansion could give her: hope. Years later, Margaret would often tell people that the best meal of her life wasn't served at a five-star restaurant. It was served in her own dining room by a woman who had walked into the house as a stranger. A woman who didn't know her wealth. A woman who didn't care about her mansion. A woman who simply cared that an old woman was lonely. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs a little hope, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories about kindness, family, forgiveness, and second chances. And before we end, I have one special request for you. Comment, "Kindness can save a life," if you believe that even the smallest act of compassion can change someone's world. Because sometimes, the person sitting quietly in front of you isn't asking for money. They aren't asking for miracles. They are simply waiting for someone to notice that they're hurting. And sometimes, all it takes is one warm meal, one listening heart, and one person willing to stay. For Margaret Whitmore, that person was Clara. And for Gregory, the lesson came just in time. The greatest fortune in life isn't what you can afford to buy. It is having someone beside you when you finally sit down to eat.